Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Tek Caffe Podcast. I'm Ahmed Misbah, your host for today. Tek Caffe was launched in 2023 with a simple mission to empower the software development community through meaningful conversations. Since then, we've had the honor of hosting incredible voices in the field, including Tim Oettinger, Venkat Subramaniam, Jeff Langer, and many more. Many thanks to all the great speakers we hosted since 2023. Okay. While our focus is on extreme programming and its technical practices like test-first development, continuous delivery, and refactoring, Tek Caffe is not just about code and agility. It's also about people and team dynamics. In fact, several of our past episodes explored this dimension deeply, from navigating developer turnover to exploring mentorships to building resilient collaborative teams. Check out our website to watch previous episodes of the podcast. And now I'm thrilled to welcome back Paige Watson for his fourth appearance on the podcast. Thank you for being with us today, Paige.
Oh, you are welcome. I'm pleased to be back.
The pleasure is all ours. Previously, Paige shared powerful insights on fluid scaling technology, XP practices, and taming legacy code with pinning tests and the strangler pattern. Today, he's here to explore a topic that's both deeply personal and widely relevant: ADHD-driven development practices. This isn't the first time Paige has delivered this session. He's shared it on other platforms before us, and we're excited to be hosting it here on Tek Caffe. Paige is a technical coach, trainer, and international speaker with over 30 years of experience helping craft high-quality software and evolving into sustainable, high-performing teams. He's known for championing practices like clean code, TDD, and more programming, with a unique focus on both software craftsmanship and team collaboration. He also writes about ADHD and neurodiversity in tech on softwareascraft.com. And you can access his website to read the different blog posts he has on these topics. And these are highly recommended. And so, without further ado, Paige, we're happy to have you back, and let's dive in.
Fabulous. Thank you. Okay, so are we seeing my slides there? There we go. Fabulous. All right, so I'm going to talk today about my ADHD and how it has sort of driven me to the practices that I use, and how I found ways of working better, I guess, for myself, and how I've learned to sort of cope with my ADHD and use those practices. First, I'm not a medical expert or even an expert on ADHD outside of my own personal experiences, right? If you want to know more about ADHD, please talk to a medical professional. And then second, ADHD is different for everyone that has it. This is all about my experiences as a software developer with ADHD. It may be different from what yours or others experience. So please understand and take what you can and use what you can. My goal is really to offer an insight and definitely not a one-size-fits-all perspective. So here's the scenario. I sit down at my desk every morning. I've got this fresh cup of coffee in my hand. I'm ready to tackle this day of writing this amazing code. And the moment my fingers hit the keyboard, the world kind of disappears. I'm in the zone, right? I reach over and I grab my coffee and I take a sip, and it's ice cold again. Right? Okay, I'll take a sip anyways. But I realize, you know what? I never ate lunch either. Does that sound familiar? This is my life with ADHD. It's not just about distraction. It's about focus and flow and sometimes forgetting to function. ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's a neurodevelopmental condition that affects how a person regulates attention and impulses and activity levels. And it's not about having no attention. It's about having inconsistent control over where that attention goes. You can think of it like this, that sometimes I can't focus at all, right? I'm distracted, I'm all over the place. And other times I can't stop focusing. It's like a hyper focus. So ADHD often involves difficulty starting or finishing tasks, trouble with organization and memory, emotional regulation challenges. So frustration, or I'll talk about rejection sensitivity. It also a need for stimulation. When I'm bored, it is like physically painful. So it's not a lack of intelligence or effort. It's a different brain wiring, right? And once I understood that, I started to find ways to work with it and not against it. People think ADHD is this inability to focus, and it's not. It's an inability to kind of control the focus. My brain doesn't ask me what I want to focus on. It just decides, and I'm kind of along for the ride. Right? One moment I'm in a meeting and I'm nodding along, trying to stay engaged. And the next, oh, my brain catches a random thought. What if compilers had feelings? And suddenly I'm down this internal rabbit hole in my brain while everybody else keeps talking and I'm thinking about compilers having feelings. And then there's hyperfocus. When ADHD brains do lock onto something, they don't let go very easily. Like hours disappear, responsibilities just go out the window, right? Do you ever realize at 3 p.m. that you've spent an entire day refactoring a function or a class, and that you had committed to getting something totally different delivered, and you missed a very important meeting where you were supposed to be the presenter? Yeah, I've been there. I've done that, right? And that's the flip side of distraction, that hyper focus. And the coffee thing, it's kind of a metaphor, right? I'll start a task, I'll get distracted, I'll forget about it, I'll start a new task, and I'll get distracted from that. You know, it's kind of half-finished cups of coffee as code everywhere. So to understand where I am, let me tell you a little about where I was and some of the main issues that I was facing. And I'll talk about this. I talk about it a little bit in the past tense. And the past tense is what I consider sort of the before time. I take medication. It works fabulously for me. It's very effective for helping me maintain and regulate my brain functionality. And I've done therapy, which is also extremely effective. And I would highly recommend it to anyone that finds themselves needing more help with their ADHD regulation. Again, I'm not a doctor. Talk to your medical professional about both of those, but it works really well for me. So some of the things that I talk about is a little more in the past, but they're really important to understand how I got here and how they can affect me. So I can get really overwhelmed really easily. Big projects feel huge to me. Too many unknowns, and my brain sort of freezes. I just kind of lock up, and I don't know. I can't find the things to say. There's a time that I stared at the IDE for an hour, unable to start working on this new feature that I had been assigned. And not because I didn't know what to do or because I didn't have the requirements, but because I couldn't pick a place to begin. Right? My brain just couldn't find, there was too many possibles, and I just froze up there. I have memory issues. And so I think of my memory in terms of short-term, like a short-term memory buffer and a long-term hard drive. And that short-term memory buffer gets flushed pretty easily. And it doesn't often write the data to the hard drive. Sometimes I can't remember what I did yesterday. I can't remember what the code does. I'm constantly rereading and redoing it. And short-term memory for me is unreliable, right? So context switching destroys my mental state. That long-term memory, that hard drive, is a space for important information. The problem is I also have a hard time understanding what's important. This is where I have to make the choice to refactor the entire project to use an eventing system because it will be better in the long run versus working on the feature that's supposed to be done this week. Which one of these is more important? It's sometimes hard for my brain to make that decision. Okay? I also have a thing called RSD, or rejection sensitivity dysphoria. I react really strongly to anything that I perceive as rejection. So one critical comment on a code review could send me into this spiral of self-doubt. I'm in a meeting and I make a suggestion and it gets ignored. Well, clearly everybody thinks I'm terrible at my job and I should just leave, right? This is my RSD, and rationally, I know it's not true. But ADHD doesn't do rational, it does emotions at full volume. So I would often go to great lengths to avoid any conflict where I could be wrong or perceived as wrong, or I could perceive that maybe someone would react negatively. And this usually meant anything involved with my manager or someone senior to me. This shows up as a defiance when you tell me no. Should I refactor this system into a message-based eventing system? No. Well, guess what? I'm going to do it anyways because you can't tell me what to do. Right? All these sort of things, very, very much things I've had to work through. And again, medication therapy have helped quite a lot. But I look back and it was things I didn't know about before, and really affected my work. And years of forgetting conversations or missing meetings or not being able to prioritize that importance, they all pile up, and they gave me this major case of imposter syndrome. Right? ADHD makes it harder to track my own wins. I would finish a project and then instantly forget how much work it took. Instead, I wouldn't remember how much I needed to actually get done and how I was able to come up with this elegant solution that I hadn't thought of before. All those things would be discarded, and I would put too much importance on what went wrong. So I wrote that to the hard drive. And what went well kind of got flushed from the buffer. And then the cycle continues. I look back and I only remember the things that were kind of negative and didn't go well. And as developers, we're asked to do some pretty amazing stuff. And when we're asked, can you do this? We kind of are conditioned to say yes, even though we may be unsure. We're unsure of how to do it, right? But of course we can. We're developers. That's what we do. We solve problems. And if we can't do it, maybe they'll hire someone that can. Well, I don't want that, so I'm going to say yes. And this kind of reinforces my imposter syndrome as my brain continues to bring up these failures from past projects, right? And then it's wash, rinse, repeat, ad infinitum, ad nauseum. So all these things are things that show up in my work, or did show up in my work. I used to think I had to fix my brain to be a good developer. And it turns out I really just needed the right practices. And what are those practices? Well, one of the things that works really well for me is collaborative programming. You might know of it as ensemble or mob or team programming, and it has really been a godsend. When I work collaboratively, The team helps me stay on track, especially when my brain wants to chase those sort of tangents of going off down the rabbit hole. I get real-time feedback that helps me avoid overthinking. If I'm headed off the rails in the wrong direction, I find out immediately. I've learned to value the feedback from the people that I'm working with. And because I'm working in a group on a regular basis, I'm able to kind of gain a much more of a psychological safety. I start to understand that a question like, why would you use a for loop there? It used to set off my RSD. You'd be like, well, you can't question me. I'm a senior developer and I've been doing this for years, and but that's not what it is. Now I understand it's a question to gain knowledge, not a condemnation of my coding ability. Right? That question is, hey, I was going to use for each or a stream, but you used a for loop. Maybe there's something that we don't, that I can understand better. That's the question that I get now. And I'm comfortable that question is a knowledge question, not a condemnation. Right? And when we work collaboratively, the whole team is responsible for the architecture and code. Right? This shared responsibility really helps override my imposter syndrome. I don't have to say I have to know everything, because I don't. We all know everything. We work together. I don't get overwhelmed trying to plan and keep track of the entire architecture, nor do I hyper focus on the minutia. If I'm sort of looking at the big thing and I start to get overwhelmed, and I can hear one of my favorite people and collaborators who I've worked with for many years. He's actually there in the picture at the computer. Steve Quo, I can hear him say, let's just start on this little part right here, right? Getting me back on track. And it's amazing. And then I don't hyper focus. If I start to focus on something and like work on it, I'm just going to spend all my time on it. Others in the group say, you know what? We're to a good place on this. Let's move on to the next task. And then we can come back and change or update or refactor it as we find it necessary later. So it's a really good regulator and keeps me from getting overwhelmed and hyper-focusing. My teammates hold the context that I don't see or don't remember. I don't get anxiety about missing a test scenario or which test to write next. Right? Often the ability to discuss what we heard in a meeting with the business means that important stuff that I remember hearing is also supplemented with the important stuff that they remember hearing. And I want to point out, we talk about ensemble or collaborative programming, but when we work that way, it doesn't mean just when we write code. We send multiple people to meetings. That way, we get multiple viewpoints. Things that I hear that are important, I'll come back and say, oh, I heard that we need to change this background color to blue. And someone else will say, well, yeah, they did say that. But then later they were talking about, maybe a light green would be better. And then we have that discussion of what did you hear? What did I hear? And do we need to get more, feedback on this from the project person or the client or whatever, right? But we work together. And that is immensely helpful for me. This ensures that we have a better understanding of the context and things like, when are we done and what are those next steps? And it doesn't sort of fall on me to make those decisions myself. In ADHD, there's a strategy called body doubling, where someone with ADHD works on a task in the presence of another person. And this doesn't mean that presence is there to sort of keep you on track or judge or regulate. That presence just acts as a subtle motivator, encouraging focus and helping overcome procrastination or starting difficult tasks, right? So when we work collaboratively, we're all there. having everybody focus together on the same work makes it easier to continue to focus without getting lost or distracted. When I work alone, and I would often, and I still do, find myself suddenly lost in my code, right? That sort of, why am I going down this path? I had a plan, but now I'm not sure what it was. You know, I do TDD. I wrote a good test for this. I made the test pass. You know, I extracted this dependency and I wrapped it, and, you know, I have great architecture, but I don't remember why I was going to call this library. You know, I sort of, it goes out of my mind. And so that can be really overwhelming for me, especially if I feel like there's an urgency to sort of finish or deploy or whatever. And that really can lead me to freezing and not doing anything, which is sort of the opposite of the effect that I'd like. So when we're collaborating, when I'm the driver, the person at the keyboard, I only have to focus on being the input. I only have to listen to what people are asking me to type and inputting it into the computer. When I'm navigating or helping to solve the problem and I'm not at the keyboard, others can help me continue to move forward when I get frozen. I'll start to sort of freeze up and not be sure where to go. And someone else will say, hey, you know, we were doing this. Can we go this way? Like, yeah, that's great. Because I don't, you know, I don't have to worry about everything all the time. Again, that context. And then remember, I was kind of talking about the cold coffee and hyper focus. So in a group, because we're on all the time, we're all focused all the time, it can be really exhausting for your brain power. Right? You need to take breaks regularly. The collaborative groups that I've been in have used some sort of Pomodoro timer to make sure that we all maintain a good brain health. And if you're not familiar with Pomodoro, the idea is that you set a timer, and in the beginning, a really great one is, say, you set a 25-minute timer, you work for 25 minutes, you focus for 25 minutes, and then you take a 5-minute break. You get up, you walk away if you can from your work, go outside or look outside, or, you know, just some sort of go talk to someone, go get some more coffee, right? That sort of let your brain recover. And then you come back and then you do another 25 minutes. And the idea is that you maintain your brain power by not totally exhausting it throughout the day. It's a really great practice. And even if we're not doing collaborative work, it's super effective. I found that it allows me to say, I'm going to focus for the next 25 minutes on this. And it's okay to focus on this. And then I don't, the timer goes off, and then I've gotten into the habit. Okay, I can stop here and I can get up and take a break. This really helps with the hyper focus especially when I'm working by myself. Right? It's getting outside and taking a quick walk or something like that, really good for my emotional regulation and my physical health as well. So highly recommend Pomodoro. So I do test-driven development. As a practice for actually writing code, TDD is immensely helpful. ADHD loves instant feedback. TDD gives me that. I write a tiny test, I see it fail, I write a little bit of code to fix it, and bam, dopamine hit. Woo! If you've ever worked with me, we actually get in, like, we'll write a test, we'll see it fail, we'll fix it, and then everybody will go, woo! It's kind of fun, but it really is that little dopamine hit of like, oh, that was great, let's do it some more. Right? I really dislike debugging. Debugging, it was, I stepped through a compiler, requires me to hold too much in my head, and it's really easy for me to get lost or overwhelmed as I go from line to line to line, especially as you're getting deeper into the code and you're like, gosh, what was that variable that we set up above? Right? And then I get stuck or I get lost. When I'm doing test-driven development, I rarely debug when I'm writing code. It is just not necessary because I write small, simple tests that drive the development and also require me to architect it in a way that is easy to test and easy to follow. If there's a defect, right, I write a test that mimics that defect, and I may use debugging to help me figure out where that defect is and that sort of thing. And when that test passes, I can ensure that the defect has been fixed. But when I'm writing code as part of adding new code, extending the functionality, I hardly ever use the debugger. TDD really helps reduce mental load. Again, I kind of talked about, I write a test that covers a very small unit of code. It tests one thing and one thing only. I know all of the inputs and all of the outputs, which really reduces the cognitive complexity. I don't have to figure out how am I going to set up and make this database so that that puts the data into this function, et cetera, et cetera. I'm writing just a very small amount and I'm setting up the inputs and outputs. So I don't feel that I'm getting overwhelmed by cognitive complexity. And if I do start to go, wow, I'm having trouble following this, that's usually a flag for me that I need to refactor into something simpler. TDD breaks big, scary work into safe, tiny steps. Each test is a checkpoint. I can stop anytime and not be lost. And in fact, sometimes when we take a break or when I go to lunch, I will leave a broken test so that when I come back, I run all the tests and like, oh, that test is not passing. It's still failing. That must be where we left off. Right? I don't need to hold the entire design of the application or even the entire design of the class in my head before I continue, because of the test and the unit is a small chunk of work. I still believe in roadmaps and knowing where you're going, but that's really different than designing this entire architecture up front. And honestly, when we do design it up front, I find that, we start down a path, and by the time we get to a couple weeks out and we're like, oh, we're going to have to build this. We designed this function or this feature or this class. Well, we don't really need it anymore, or it's totally different than what we thought it was going to be. Right. And so using TDD allows me to sort of continue to move forward without having to do all that upfront work in terms of coming up with this giant architecture and design. And then I write my tests as requirements in code format. And when I have written and passed tests for all of the requirements, I'm done. Right? There's less of a chance of forgetting or getting overwhelmed by the amount of work. I no longer think I finished that requirement, maybe. Instead, if there's a test for it, then I did. If not, then I write one. Right? And sometimes people will point out like, well, if the requirement says that you pass in 2 integers and it returns the sum of those 2 integers, then you're not writing all the tests for everything. And my explanation for that is when we talk about requirements in code format, if there is a requirement that when you pass null into a function, then it throws an exception, that may not be written in the requirement document or the story or whatever you're using, but it is still a requirement, and I do need to write a test for that. And if I'm not sure what's supposed to happen, if I pass null, if I pass empty, if I pass undefined, whatever, is it supposed to throw an exception? Is it supposed to just return the first number? I don't know. This is a chance for me to go back to the customer and say, here's something that I think wasn't called out in the requirements, and how should this act? And then I write a test for it. Another thing that works really well for me is discovery trees. Discovery trees came from when I worked at a company called Premera Blue Cross, which is a Washington State health insurance company. We started writing notes to ourselves about work to do later as we were writing code, right? And it quickly became this effective tool for managing tasks for the team. First, we started going like, oh, you know what? We need to remember to do this. Okay, well, we'll write it on a Post-it, and they would stick it on the window. Right? Later, we started to find that we could break down our work sort of as we went, and find the work that we needed to do as we did it. This is a quote that comes from 𝘠𝘰𝘭𝘆 𝘍. We discover the work by doing the work. Right? So discovery trees aren't about big upfront design, but they are about starting with an idea or a chunk of work or a requirement, and then breaking it down until we get to a place where we can start working on something right now. So if you look at the picture here, and this is a very old one, and we use Windows because Windows are great whiteboards, by the way. You'll look in the upper left-hand corner, we have a story, and it's deployed to the Windows store. Okay, and it actually has a story number on it so that we can refer back to, whatever work tracking software that you use. And then we said, okay, what are some things we need to do with this? Well, here are 4 things that we knew that we needed to do right away. Okay, we write those down. And we started and said, which of these is the most important thing that the application doesn't do right now? Right? In this case, maybe it was set up a Git repo in VSTS. Okay. So can we start on that right now? Can we do that work right now? If the answer is yes, let's start on it, and we stop sort of designing or architecting the rest of it, right? We start doing that. We do it. We're finished with it. Now we go to the next 3 and say, which of these 3 is the most important thing that the app doesn't do right now? And let's, create a project. All right, can we do that right now? Can we start on that? Yes? Okay, bam. Right to it. Again, what is the most important thing that the application doesn't do right now? And let's start working on that as soon as possible. So the really nice thing that came out of this, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. This provides a visual clarity. Discovery trees, they visualize the task, the notes, and the risks, right? I can glance at this tree and get information about where we are and what needs to be done next. I can quickly understand what's done and what's in progress for the work that I know right now. So if you look at this and I tell you that the slashed items, the slash stickies are finished, what percentage of done for the work that we know right now do you think we're at? And I would say that we're slightly over 50%, because the top 2 items, we have finished 2 of the top 4 items. And then if you follow the tree down, we finished a couple of the ones below it. So that's a little more than 50%. So for the work we know, anybody can come by and look at this and say, hey, where are you guys? And we look at it and go, about 50% of the way there. Right? Also, if you look, we put little corner ticks in the corners of the ones that were in progress. So then we also people could tell, what are you working on right now? The same as we did a TDD, the same TDD principle of breaking down tasks and then until they're so small that I can't get overwhelmed. We did it here. And then we'd work on one twig at a time. I don't have to plan the entire project. I just have to plan enough to start working right now. And then I kind of talked about being able to tell where we are and the tasks. When I think of something that needs to be done, I can just add it to the tree. If I'm like, oh, we forgot to do this, I'm just going to add it to the tree. And then we do it at the last responsible moment. And that is not the last possible moment. That's the last responsible moment. So we always ask ourselves, what's the most important thing that the app doesn't do right now? And is this the last responsible moment to make a decision about, how we're going to do it, right? Before discovery trees, I'd either have to implement it immediately or more likely that thing would go on the memory buffer, right? Of like, oh, I got to remember to do this later. And then, of course, it would get flushed as I changed some sort of context. So this has been an amazing sort of practice that has helped me. Not only at work, I use it at home too. I have a model railroad layout. I have a discovery tree for all the stuff. We've used online tools like Mural or Miro. And actually those are really nice because you can change the color, right? White is ready, yellow is working, red is blocked, green is done, et cetera, et cetera. And then you can give access to anybody that wants to see it at any time. It's all about radiating that information and breaking it down into the simplest tasks. So for years, I thought ADHD was something that I had to overcome. But really the truth, ADHD led me to these practices that don't just help me, they make work better for everyone. Small steps, externalized thinking, structured collaboration, they're not just survival strategies for me. They're solid development practices that can create clarity, instill quality, reduce cognitive load, and make teams stronger. So yeah, I forget my coffee sometimes, but I've learned how to work with my brain instead of against it. And that's really an amazing difference. So thank you. I put all of my talks online. You're more than welcome to go and find the resources and the slide deck and that sort of thing. Follow me on LinkedIn or Blue Sky. And then I'd love to take any questions or discussions.
Thank you very much, Paige, for this great presentation. I personally liked it a lot, and I think that it takes a lot of courage to do a presentation like this, and a lot of safety, if that's the right term to use. And I appreciate a lot that you've shared all of this wealth of information. We've got a couple of questions prepared for you, so
Sure.
I think we can move to those, and then perhaps reshare back the slide in case people want to get in touch with you after the presentation. Okay, so listening to the presentation, it became clear to me that ADHD is not just about one trait or behavior. It's this complex mix of things like distractibility, hyperfocus, and memory lapses. And the truth is, a lot of people, even those without ADHD, experience these traits in varying degrees. So I wonder how teams and organizations can be more intentional about supporting these characteristics without jumping to assumptions or labeling people.
Yeah, and that's a fabulous question. Thank you. So first, ADHD is often surrounded by other issues, other things as well, dyslexia, dysgraphia, RSD, all these things, and more. And so, we use the term ADHD because it's a good sort of hold all, but it doesn't often. My ADHD doesn't often describe someone else's, right? As to like, so how do I say it? It's a tough question, because I don't think it's appropriate to go to someone and say, hey, you have ADHD, and so we're going to do this for you, if they haven't asked for it, if they don't think they do, or whatever, right? So be aware, be sensitive. Even if, like, I've worked with people who maybe were undiagnosed. I don't know for sure, but some of the things that I see in myself, I see in them, and I want to just say, like, oh, try this, do this, And I think part of the maturity of a team, and a maturity in terms of who we are as developers and as people, really is like, okay, how can I apply my understanding of where I am and what I'm seeing without sort of putting that label or that weight on that other person? So, oftentimes I'll use my ADHD and say, I have no problem really self-disclosing or saying, here's what I need. Here's how it could be more helpful to me, right? Please don't just give me this giant project, right? When I'm working with other people that I'm seeing things that I do, maybe I say, like, hey, could we slow down and break this into smaller chunks of work? And it would really be helpful for me, even if I'm feeling confident, right? It's a really tough place to be in, especially if you're like, to answer that question, if you're not on a psychologically safe team, right? If you I think I don't know. Now you've got me stumped, and now I'm starting to get a little overwhelmed in my brain, right? And I hear this, the reason I hear this question a lot, because it is a good question. It's really important, and I think part of it is just be open to it. And instead of, here's an answer, maybe instead of saying to someone, oh, your ADHD is this and that and whatever, say, is there anything that we can do, like all of us can do as a team, that would make our work easier, whether it be as a group or as an individual? And, let the other people on the team disclose, or as much as they want, right? You never know. Someone might say, no, I'm fine. Okay, well, then we work with where we're at. Someone might say, it'd be more helpful if this, that, whatever. Okay, that's great. We don't have to put a name or a label on it to say what would make it easier for us to be more effective as a team. So maybe that's the way to think about it, as opposed to putting that label out there.
Yeah, you've mentioned psychological safety in your answer, and I think that this is simply the answer to the question, is that when you have psychological safety in place, you give the people the opportunity to suggest new ways of work, share that they're not comfortable with the way they're doing things currently. It gives them the ability to experiment. And eventually, the whole team whether it has people with ADHD or not, will reach to this way of work with practices and all of that is working well for everyone, and not just for a group of people. So yeah, I think psychological safety is the answer.
I think you're right. It is the answer, but it is not the easy answer. It's getting there, especially on a team that with people that haven't really effectively experienced a really safe team, or what I would just call a team. I don't know, right? How do we do that? As a senior developer, as an older person in the industry, maybe my job is just to show a little bit of my vulnerability and say, you know what, it's okay. It's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, I don't understand this, or I could use some help, right? Maybe that's a way to start that processing and get there. I would hope so.
I agree. I fully agree. Okay. I actually have a question regarding what you call teams, but we'll get to that. Okay. So so let's talk about clean code and cognitive load. In one of the Industrial Logic's e-learning albums, I remember 𝘠𝘭𝘆 Hill describing the developer workflow as scan, read, write. That really stuck with me, because when you're dealing with ADHD or just information overload, that scanning phase can be really draining. You're not even reading or writing yet, but your brain is already burning energy trying to figure out where to begin. I've come to appreciate how clean, readable code can really reduce that mental overhead. So I'm curious, do you see clean code and refactoring not just as practices for elegance and maintainability, but also as tools for reducing cognitive load, especially for neurodivergent developers?
Yes. I mean, that's the answer. I talked a little about how I so dislike debugging. And the reason I dislike it is because I have to hold this information in my brain as I step through the code. And, the same thing happens when we scan. And that is a fabulous video, by the way. But if I'm having to keep in my brain, like if I'm scanning and I'm looking for, where do I get the user? And I have a function called, make database call versus a function called get user by ID. And they do, if the name is the only difference, that get user by ID is going to be much easier for me to understand what's happening. If the methods are small and accurately describe what they do, and they only do one thing, right? Like, it is so much easier for me to understand and not get overwhelmed and be able to start functioning quickly, right? So that's probably one of the really big reasons that I'm so dogmatic about the practices and writing good code and refactoring well, because it just makes it easier. Right.
I think that's one thing you can be dogmatic about.
Yeah.
And outside of the code, things like diagrams, domain models, decision logs, do you think solid external documentation, I'm not talking about comprehensive documentation, I'm talking about just enough documentation, can this play an even bigger role when someone's managing ADHD?
Maybe. So part of my issue is that if I have to look in more than one or two places, again, I get overwhelmed. Now or it's really easy to get sort of distracted, or, I'm thinking like, okay, I got to open this file. Now, where was that? And I'm going back and forth, and I'm switching contexts even between files. So I don't put a lot of, I don't use documents in that way a whole lot. Now, it can be sort of helpful, like architecture diagrams, interesting, can be helpful. But, I don't think it can get too overwhelming for me. But the really nice thing is I have the rest of the people that I'm working with, that I'm collaborating with, who can do that. And they can figure out what we need, and then we can all work together, and they can be like, oh, I saw in the documentation that this is where we're going, and this is how we call it. And I'd be like, great, let's do that. But for me personally, I struggle with that quite a bit, and especially remember to keep them up to date, and decision logs. Interesting. I can see their usefulness. I would never, I'd get 3 in there, and then they would disappear. I'd never remember to do it again. So if it works for you, do it, right? If it's good for the team and the team decides it's an effective practice, do it. But personally, I don't like the documentation side is one of my harder to deal with aspects.
Yeah, perfectly understood.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have a question from the audience. So, and of course, if you think it's too personal, just let me know if you'd like to skip it. So how did you figure you might have ADHD and start your diagnosis and treatment journey?
Yeah, so I was not diagnosed until I was in my mid-40s. So I lived most of my life with it. I had many coping mechanisms, as most people with ADHD tend to have. It was actually my wife who she has a brother who is very ADHD, very hyperactive. I am not hyperactive, right? There's kind of 3 quadrants, right? There's hyperactive and not hyperactive, attentive and inattentive, and functioning and non-functioning. Right. And her brother was in the non for all 3 of them. I am not hyperactive. I'm functioning. Right. But she was like, yeah, there's something I'd really, if you'd be interested, I think it would be important to talk to someone about this. Right. And so I did, and I went and I found a therapist locally who understood and sort of specialized in helping ADHD. There are lots of tests, like written tests. Oh my gosh, they're terrible because they're like, remember these 8 things and then write them down, and then we'll come back in 20 minutes and you can write them down again. And I'm like, I can't remember them. But you go through this sort of battery of tests, and they go, well, based on your results, this is what we believe. And, so that was super helpful. And then with medication, I was very sort of averse to taking medication. I didn't want to in the beginning. And I don't know why. I guess maybe there was a stigma attached to it that felt uncomfortable. And then one day my therapist said, but if you try it and it works to help you be more effective, how are you going to know if you don't try it? And if you try it and it doesn't work as you want, and it's not as effective, whatever, then you can always stop. Right. So that's how I got here. And it was really amazing. And I'm pleased I did. And sometimes I look back and wish that I had caught it earlier in my life. But sometimes, especially my sort of brand of ADHD, without being hyperactive, it's not really caught as much in males. right? Because the boys are the ones that are always doing this, and the girls who have ADHD aren't, well, I don't want to say they're not hyperactive, but you tend to see it present in a different way in female, right? So because I wasn't hyperactive, it didn't get caught until much later. But that's it.
Oh, thanks a lot for sharing this, Paige.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay, so let's move to the topic of collaborative programming. Now, before we went live, I showed you this screenshot from X. This tweet was posted by 𝘩𝘪𝘵 a couple of years ago, and it shows a number of software engineers doing work in 1966. And I think that what 𝘩𝘪𝘵 was trying to say here was, this is how software development started. It has always been collaborative exercise. And we've had a session with Jeff Langer last year where we talked about more programming and the kind of collaboration that really makes XP works. And that was really powerful. But something I keep running into is this outdated mindset that sees collaboration as inefficient, like it's only for emergencies. The default is still solo work, individual ownership, and isolation. So from your experience, Paige, how do we move past that? How do we reframe collaboration as a first-class default way of working, especially in environments that are still stuck in old school project management thinking?
Yeah, I think that that's a good question. If I could answer that question, I'd be a lot richer right now. And I think that's one of the things that I do, right? As a coach, my job is to help teams find the best practices that work for them, right? And it's very interesting that I'll talk to C-suite levels, executives, and I'll explain like, oh, well, it's getting all the right people in the room and we're all working on this together to, using all of our knowledge at the same time to ensure high quality product and rapidly produced and effectively built as to the customer's needs, all this stuff. And they go, yeah, that's great. I think we should totally try that. And then you go to the team and the team goes, wow, that sounds excellent. We'd be willing to try that. And then you get to the sort of middle management who are like, no, we can't do that. And I don't know exactly where that comes from. Because, I think, well, and I don't want to sort of disparage middle management. I think they have a very hard position because they have to get this work done. They have to drive the team to get the work done. They're getting pressure from below, from the team who's like, we don't want to do all this stuff. We want to do this the right way. And they get pressure from above, from the executives who are like, well, you said you could get this done in a month and, whatever. So they're kind of stuck in this really tough place. And I think that trying new things, experimenting is often a very, very uncomfortable position to be in from that standpoint. Now, experimenting is probably the way to introduce it. We do this when we have a bug, when we have a really important thing, we all get together and we work on it. We get the people, everybody comes over and we stand in front of one computer and someone's typing and someone else is telling them how to get there and like, oh, let's try this. And somebody goes, no, the database doesn't do that. We have to get it from here. So we do that collaborative work when it's important. How do we experiment and say, if we believe that all our work is important, maybe we could experiment on a story or an iteration or for a couple weeks or a couple months of, for half the day, every day, let's try this. And let's see if it's more effective. What are the benefits we get from it? Framing it in that experiment is probably the best way to do that. That being said, and of course, I'm a coach, so I'm going to suggest that you get a coach. You get someone who has done it before that can help with the bumps, help with the things that, like, it's not just 5 people sitting around and watching one person program, right? How do we work collaboratively? So I think that's really important, to have someone that knows how to do that and can help you. And whether you have 𝘠𝘰𝘀𝘀 come in and hire him because he's fabulous, of course, or or another coach, I think that's really important. But I don't, I don't think there's a switch, unfortunately, that we could just say, look, throw the switch and we all get better right now. Even though I think that would happen if we all moved to sort of more of a collaborative programming model. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question, but I think that the benefits that we see from it are realized fairly quickly when they're given a chance. And maybe that's the thing. Sometimes working in a greenfield project, it's a lot easier to start that way than it is to change, unfortunately. And in fact, just as a note, I think if you're working solo on everything, if you're doing that scatter gather, as Tim Ottinger calls it, where like everybody gets little bits and you go off and then you come back together and you try and make them work together and then you go off and if you're doing that kind of work, I used to think that going to pairing, let's do pairing, then let's do mobbing. I don't think that anymore. I think you should skip the pairing step and go right to the mobbing step. I think it's a more effective way to sort of change the process.
Yeah. So I think we should expect you to get richer after this session, right? Since you've answered the question.
Yeah, maybe it's not so much answering the question, it's getting everybody to do what I say. That would be
yeah. Yeah, but I think you've said something that nailed it, that give it a chance. So this is the point where we should start from, is that let's give it a chance, let's try it out, and if possible, let's get a coach who has done this before with a lot of teams, and that can speed up things a little bit, okay, and the adoption.
Yeah.
But it's all about giving things a chance.
And I don't know. So I used an example. I don't know if it was probably from 𝘠𝘰𝘀𝘀's book on software teaming, right? And that idea of when we have a bug, we all get together and do this. We do this now. Why is it that we then change the process for this? We do this because it's highly high quality, rapid, when we work on that bug, knowledge transfer goes really well but then we go back to regular work. Why don't we do it then? What is it about the regular work that we want to do in a lower quality, less effective way? Yeah. So.
Yeah. Okay, let's move to TDD. So in my view, TDD is the most powerful of all practices, not just for developers with ADHD, but really for any developer. It brings clarity, structure, and a steady rhythm to your work. You're always asking one focused question at a time and getting quick feedback before moving on, which is incredibly helpful when your mind is busy or can get easily distracted. But what often gets lost in today's red-green refactor mantra are two subtle but important parts: the think phase
Mhm.
that James Shore emphasizes, and the test list practice that Kent Beck describes in TDD by example. That test list idea, having a list of small tests you want to write, such a powerful tool, especially when your attention shifts or you're trying to get back into flow. So, Paige, do you write
Mhm.
a test list? If yes, how the test list help you manage focus or reconnect with the work after a break or a moment of distraction?
So I think that I would say yes, kind of. Yes, sort of. So I think my test list is more in discovery tree format, right? Like each of those leaves on the discovery tree has a test or two or four that go with it, right? And so I think that's more. I don't necessarily write a list of here's the tests I want to write. Even just a small list. But I think there is a roadmap. There is an idea of here are the things we need to do. Just as Kent Beck talks about, you have that understanding of the next few tests. Just as James Shore mentions, you have to have that think of like, where are we going? You can't just it's not just write another little test, right? You think about what you want to happen. You think about here's the evolution of the code, just as red green refactor is really an easy, it's simple to say, right? But it encompasses so much more, right? You'll often see Ted M. Young will talk about did the test fail for the reason you expected it to? That's really important, right? If I write a test and it fails, hooray, good, I wrote a test that failed. But did it fail because for the reason I thought it was going to fail? Because if it didn't, well, then there's some issue somewhere else in the code, maybe, right? If it did, then I'm moving towards making the functionality that I expect. So this is still part of that sort of think aspect as well, right? When I'm thinking about the tests I want to write, I want to think about not just what do I want to test, why do I want to test it, and how do I want to test it so that I know that that's the thing that's being effectively tested. And all those sort of things, I think, come with practice. And in my case, I use the discovery trees to kind of keep track of that also. Because we won't just put chunks of work on that discovery tree. There'll be other, like if we are thinking about, we need this test and this test and this test, we'll make stickies for those as well.
I think we need a dedicated session on discovery trees.
It's at least an hour, maybe two.
Yeah. But when you said we don't really need a classical test list, we can just do that on the discovery tree, it really makes a lot of sense. So it looks like a very powerful tool or practice. And I think we should be doing a dedicated episode on that.
Sure. But again, I don't think it's that we don't need those. I think it's that the discovery tree is what works well for me and what works well for you and your team. And if having a basic test list works well, then great. If you're just making notes, 𝘠𝘠𝘪𝘈 loves to, he'll write the pseudocode, in a comment. He'll create the test function with nothing in it and then just start it with a comment create the object, pass in this variable, check that it does this, whatever in the comment, and then he'll start writing the test from there. That's fabulous because you're thinking, you're planning what that test is going to do, what you're going to test, how you're going to test it, and what you expect to happen. So however that works, whether it be a list or comments or discovery trees or whatnot, it's kind of an unspoken part of TDD also.
Yeah, I agree. So while we're on the subject, have you ever tried the test commit revert, TCR?
Yes.
Oh, okay, that's good. So this raises a question.
Yeah.
For someone with ADHD, could this kind of ultra tight loop be helpful, or does it actually add more cognitive pressure?
I think that it is. It was interesting, and you can only really do it when you're refactoring or you're adding to existing legacy code, because you can't build on it. Because of course in TDD you write a test and it fails. Well, in TCR that would immediately revert. But if you have an existing test or legacy tests or whatnot, you can do that where I'm going to add functionality, and the test expects it to pass. Okay, well, if it passes, then I can continue working. If not, it reverts. I liked it. It was interesting. I haven't had a lot of actual use in production code for a company that I'm working for or with. It's only been sort of personal practice, see how it is. I thought it was okay. It wasn't too much. It was a little frustrating in the beginning, but then, everything is, right? Once I started to understand the concept and what exactly is happening, then it was a little easier. And in fact, we do sort of this in a little bit larger scale. Teams I work with often do this sort of thing where we'll be like, okay, let's write a test. We write the test. Okay, it fails. Let's start working on it. We start working on getting it to pass. And if it's been more than 10, 15 minutes and we still can't get it to pass, we'll revert back to the last point and start again, right? Because that's a great idea. Why are you banging your head against something that's not working? Because we do these very small micro commits, right? Every time a test passes, we commit, and then we refactor, and all the tests pass, and then we commit, right? It's really easy to get into the practice of, I'm going to write a test, I'm going to make it fail, and then I'm going to try and make it pass. And if I can't quite get there, well, let's revert what we've done and start again. Your brain knows I'm not going to go down that path. I'm going to go this way this time, and maybe that'll work, right? And so you actually save time, I think, when you do that little revert. So TCR is that in a micro format and works pretty well. You get that feedback loop right away. But I'd love to try in production ish. I think it could be an effective tool.
Yeah, I fully agree. Okay, so we're kind of running out of time. I think we have time for one or two more questions. I had some questions on discovery trees, but I think it's a big topic that needs something dedicated. So I think I'll skip these questions, and maybe we'll move to the last bit of questions, broader reflections. So I'll be honest here. I don't know how someone with ADHD can be expected to function, let alone thrive, in a rigid, plan-driven environment. In many ways, XP practices aren't just good for engineering. They are humane practices. They're a survival kit. You've mentioned that I think discovery trees or collaborative programming is God sent. I like this term. So I'll say something I'm not proud of. I've worked in companies that weren't welcoming to people with ADHD or any form of neurodiversity. And at one point, that even led me to reject someone in an interview because they disclosed they had ADHD. That moment stuck with me. But talking to you honestly shifted my perspective. You helped me see how practices like XP can make software development workable and effective for everyone, not just people with ADHD. So I'd love to hear your take. Have you worked in environments where ADHD made things significantly harder? And what can we do as a community to build workspaces that actually embrace and support neurodiverse developers?
Yeah. Yeah. First off, thank you for sharing that and recognizing, right? I think that's how we grow as people. We go, gosh, that just like growing as developers, that was a mistake. I shouldn't have wrote that bug. I learned something, I'm going to factor in that knowledge and do better next time. Awesome. That's how we grow. So I think that self-recognition is really important. Yes, obviously, I think I definitely have worked in companies that that it has been very hard, and I think we, interestingly enough, recognize them. Those of us that have been doing like XP development or worked at really good companies that value us as people, not just as developers, but us as people. You can kind of almost look at job descriptions and see right away that, must be a self-starter, there are certain phrases you're like, I thought that was a good thing before, but what that really means is that I'm going to be expected to work long hours, never make a mistake, and, right, and do these practices that aren't effective for me or for the company, for that matter. It reminds me of an interview I had one time, and I said to the person, like, okay, they asked me to do whiteboarding. I don't do whiteboarding anymore. Nobody should. We shouldn't be doing that. Right? If you want someone to write code, have them do it on a computer in an IDE, like they were actually working. But I was writing on a whiteboard, and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to write this out, and then I'm going to come back and I'll refactor it, and we'll make it better and whatnot. And he said to me, why don't you just write it correctly the first time? And it was this giant red flag of, are we expected to do that? Will I be expected to do that? That's going to drive me nuts. I can't, what is it about that I don't think we all can be, anybody, neurodiverse or not, can be expected to do it correctly the first time, right? We can be expected to use our best knowledge and work to the best of our capabilities and do the best we can every time. I believe everybody does, but why does that happen? I'm going to switch a little here. Why do we have companies like that? I don't know. I think that we still kind of see software development and all sort of knowledge work in this way, in this place of, it's still sort of factory work, and maybe there's a Tayloristic aspect of, I used to think, and maybe I still do a little bit, that things will get better when people who have been developers become managers and executives, as opposed to, right? And I don't want to, again, I'm not saying negative things about people who went and got their MBA in business management and all that, because they know a lot of stuff that I don't, and they're really super fabulous. But there's not an understanding of software development, right? How we do it, how it works well, and what the right things to do are. And if there is a manager who is, or a person above you in a place of power who is telling you how to do your work that hasn't done it as a career, I think that can cause problems. That can be less effective, even if they believe through their learning and knowledge that it is the most effective way. And so, I'll switch this around. The places where I've worked that have been really amazing and have been the best places are the places where either the person that is sort of doing the management or like at the top either has been a developer and understands, or they understand they don't know it all, and they value the people that work under them and often turn and say, how do you guys think you could do this? Tell me, give me some examples, some experiments we can try. How would we make it better? Because you guys are the developers and right? So yeah, I think we need more of that. We often talk about the whole servant leadership aspect in terms of management. We need managers who are willing to say, I don't know. And that's okay, because these guys know, right? You hired me as a developer, as a software developer. Let me do that, and you be there to do the work that you know how to do in the way that you know how to do it, because I don't, right? And together we'll make a great product and we'll make a great company. Right? But I don't know that we're there in a lot of places yet. I kind of went way off, but I definitely have worked in those places. And
actually, it was spot on. I actually wrote an article on LinkedIn a couple of years ago, talking about what managers will never understand, may understand, and will always understand. Okay.
Mhm.
So I kept the XP practices in the never understand part, because they actually shouldn't understand it. I mean, they should, as the Agile Manifesto says, they should trust people to get the work done.
Right.
And say, yeah, these guys know what this is all about, and let them do the work the way the work should be done. Actually, and since you've opened this, some of the worst managers I've worked with were those that worked in software development teams as software engineers, no matter what the function was. And they did it all wrong. And then when they became managers, they were like, okay, this is the way it's done, and this is the way we should keep on doing it. Yeah. Because when you were answering the question, you've mentioned that you always thought that when managers come from an engineering background and then they do an MBA or whatever, and they become managers, that things will get better. Sometimes it does, but when the managers have really done software engineering the way it should be done. But if it's the old way of doing things, it always, unless they have this mindset of, I'm going to trust people to get the job done, it's always bad.
And I think you're right. And I did preface that by saying I used to think. I'm not 100% sure that that's fully correct, right? What we really need is again, people who say, I really believe that we are all here. We are at our company, and everyone, the person at the front desk that greets you when you come in, the CEO, the marketing person, the developer that's there on their second day, we're all here to do a job, and we all do the best we can at the time we're doing it for what we know. And we are all just as valuable, right? The CEO is no more valuable than I am, right? He has a much different knowledge set and is valuable to that knowledge set and to that work. And I am very valuable in my knowledge set and my work. And if we work together to do the great work, then the company grows, the people grow, all that sort of thing. And if we look at it that way, then it becomes easier for me as a senior person or as a manager or whatnot to say, yeah, it's okay that I don't understand that, because they do. And they will be here to do the best they can at the time they're doing it for what they know. And they will help me learn, and I will help them learn, right? And we'll all grow together. And that maybe that's all happy, joy, wishful thinking. But I've been in companies like that, and it's amazing. And they're great companies. And I would hope that we all get there.
Yeah, I hope so too. Okay, so Paige, thanks a lot for this great session today.
Thank you
again, I've personally enjoyed it and learned from it a lot. And again, I say it takes a lot of courage to do a session like this. So I raise my hat for you. Thanks a lot for being open and honest about this. And I've got people sending me over WhatsApp and Telegram telling me how a great session this is. So very much appreciated. I've reshared the slides in case, you want to get in touch with Paige. Here's his different contacts. I'd like to thank everyone for attending this session today, and feel free to reach out to us through scanning this QR, and you can also see our previous episodes. I've got one more thing. We've got a great session coming up with Mark Richards, and it's going to be on software architecture. So don't miss that. And it's going to be in an interview format. So if you have any questions for Mark, feel free to send them to me or to Tek Caffe, and we'll be happy to do that. It's going to be a great session. I personally love software architecture as much as I love XP. So we'll see you guys there. Paige, I'd like to thank you a lot, and we'll see you soon in a session about discovery trees. Huh?
Great. Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. Okay. Bye-bye.